Welcome to the third and final episode of the Helderberg Companion Podcast. Helderberg is a three-part series exploring the events following the Helderberg air crash of November 1987 right up to present day, where many lingering questions about the fate of Flight SA295 remain. I'm Tim Apter, and I'm joined by contributors from the series to dive deeper into aspects of the Helderberg story that we just didn't have time to fully explore in the documentary. If you have not yet seen episodes 1 to 3 of Helderberg, they have all aired at this point, so please stop listening if you haven't seen them. Go and watch the series and then come back, because pretty sure there'll be some bits of information that you'll want to have caught first in the documentary itself. Episode 3 of the series picks up after the TRC in 1998 and takes the viewer through the events of the 2000s up until today, from the aftermath of David Klatzo's cross-examination of witnesses at the TRC, into the subsequent investigation by the Scorpions, and finally to a more recent theory where aircraft wiring brings Boeing into the discussion with regards to safety standards. Joining me in studio is Mark de Young, author of A Firm Resolve, A History of SAA Accidents and Incidents. Welcome, Mark. Thanks so much for joining us. And via video conference, author Stephen Webb, author of The Helderberg Conspiracy, Fact or Fiction. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much.
Mark, I'm going to start with you. Now, I know you've got a very long history with Helderberg as something of an aviation enthusiast / nut. When did you start paying attention to the Helderberg story? When did it kind of come onto your radar, and how did you become so deeply fascinated by it?
Well, I think like everybody else, I can remember exactly where I was on the day the news broke, and sort of hit me as a gut punch. You know, this doesn't happen to SAA, it doesn't happen to Boeing 747s, because I was aware of the aircraft as an aircraft enthusiast. I mean, it had a reputation for reliability. And what happened at the same sort of time, I was training as a private pilot. So I was very much aware, on top of things I'd learned and been drilled into me in the Air Force during my service, about flight safety aspects, and this is becoming more and more to the fore with me, certainly from my instructors. And when the Margot Commission of Inquiry report was released, a copy was mailed to me by the Department of Civil Aviation, and I read through it cover to cover immediately. And what struck me was the newspaper headlines, which had been all over the place since the accident, since the day after, to what was happening in the court of inquiry and what was published in the transcript. It just didn't gel. There was obviously some sort of disconnect here for me. And having a rough knowledge of two previous accidents to SAA in the 1960s, 1967 and 68, I then went and spoke to my uncle, who worked in the sheet metal shop at SAA. And a lot of the things that had been coming into the public domain at that stage was countermanded, not necessarily by him saying, oh no, that's lousy. He just explained to me what the procedures were and how they would ensure that they did exactly what the FAA regulations were, what the Boeing service manual said, but how they went beyond that. For instance, in the Helderberg, the Class B cargo bay firefighting was one 9-kilogram halon fire extinguisher, which now in retrospect looks totally silly. But SAA doubled that. They put in 2, which they always went beyond what the minimum was, which is part of the reason why they were so highly regarded in that era. And then I decided, well, what was the problem with the 68 crash? And I was told by newspaper guys and people who could live through it, oh, it was a bomb on board by certain factions. And when I went to the Department of Civil Aviation and pulled that report, there was nothing about a bomb in there at all. So then it started striking me that, you know, what comes out in the public domain and what actually happens in an investigation are largely two different things. And then I started looking more and more to Helderberg and other accidents as well. I said, well, you know, if we've had 3, what other accidents are there, and what was the learnings from it? Because the thing that was drummed into my mind all along by my instructors and my time in the Air Force is, we don't investigate to blame you. We investigate to make sure that nobody else has to suffer the same problem. And that is more, I would say, a cooperative and a constructive approach to the problem. Whereas what I was seeing in the media and in the Court of Inquiry, certainly when I started reading the transcripts of the Court of Inquiry, which I read through the whole pile of them, that Mr. René van Zyl very kindly gave me lots of time in his offices to read through, which was quite an undertaking. The adversarial nature of the hearing really got to me. So then I said, okay, now let me go and find out what happened in every one of the SA accidents from the time the airline was formed to then. And let's find out exactly what happened, what the investigators did, and what the recommendations were to prevent a similar recurrence. In other words, what was the cooperative nature of the findings? And that was what my book was based on. And obviously, the Helderberg being one of the last crash that I dealt with, and also the most modern, had far more material available than the previous ones. I mean, the first accident was a one-page report signed off by the chief pilot, and compared to the volumes of information that in the Court of Inquiry transcript, let alone the annexes to that of the Helderberg. So I started looking at it, and the more I read it, the more I thought, well, let me just expand the cooperation and ask for cooperation from the airline, which, to be honest, being given the way they were treated in the media, I didn't expect to get. And when I arranged through the publicity office to go and see them, amongst having to speak to various people, eventually I had to speak to the senior executive. And that's where I kind of thought, well, I'm going to get told, thank you very much, but we don't think this is a good idea. And I was met with entirely the opposite approach. The openness and the willingness to entertain sharing this information was exactly the cooperative approach that I'd been taught is the foundation of aviation safety. And that's really how I got involved with it.
Okay. Stephen, I know you worked as a paramedic, and that's where you personally came into contact with the Helderberg story through the reconstruction of the wreckage at Jan Smuts. And then again, later in life, you were led to write your book by something of a coincidence. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with SA 295?
Yeah, it all started on a Sunday morning. I actually went to church with my wife, and we were talking to the pastor after church, and he asked for a copy of one of my previous books. And I actually had a copy of two of my books with me at the time. And I'd written a book called Paramedics, Lights and Sirens, in which I included a chapter on the Helderberg from that time that you mentioned when I went to the hangar and saw the remains of what was left of the Helderberg. And a couple of days later, he called me up and he said, I read that chapter on the Helderberg. And he says, I know somebody that you might be interested in meeting. So I said, well, that's great. That would be nice. And it must have taken, I don't know, another couple of weeks, I think, before he actually got round to introducing me to Trevor Perfect. Trevor was one of the senior technical investigators on the Helderberg. And we spent, must have been about 20 minutes in the doorway at the church after church the one day, just chatting about the Helderberg. And he invited me to his house to have a chat. And it was then that I thought, well, writing a book on the Helderberg would be something, it would be interesting. Up until that point, I hadn't really sort of thought of it in terms of any sort of conspiracy or anything. And the book itself turned out to be totally different to what I first envisaged. My first idea about the book was that I would write basically a story on how they searched for the aircraft, how they found it, how they brought the bits and pieces up, and what they did with it. That was what I was going to do. But it was only when I went to Trevor's house that evening, or one evening, and we sat talking, that he was telling me about all these funny ideas that people have and what was going on. And he let me listen to the cockpit voice recording, which I'm going to tell you right now is or was so damaged that you can hardly hear anything on it. I'm going to stress that because it's relevant. You can hardly hear anything on that tape. And when I started writing the book, things just got weirder and weirder. And I started reading more. I got hold of reports after reports, started reading them. And that's how the Helderberg conspiracy came up. A book that I had no intention of writing because it was supposed to be something totally different. But it was thanks to one of the investigators that book came up.
And I mean, I would say your book deals exhaustively with every single angle, and it moves through them, ticks them off, debates them. I feel in quite a sort of a logical manner. It doesn't, write things off. It gives them time to ventilate. Why? I'll throw this to you, Mark, but then I'll throw it back to you, Stephen, as well. Why do you think that Helderberg got to the place that it's at today? And by that I mean something where, you look at most aircraft investigations, there's an accident, an investigation, a finding, and for the most extent, the world moves on from that accident. This one has just never gone away. It's dogged by conspiracy, cover-up, hearsay, opinions, arguments, fire, really, from all directions. Mark, why do you think that is?
If I had a simple answer, I think both Stephen and I would be able to rest easy. But I think, given my involvement and what I've learned over the years, I'll use two words: vested interests. I believe that at the time that it occurred, it was unique in its timing. The country that suffered the first Combi accident being South Africa, we were also unique in our position in the world politically and geographically. And I think it made it easier for people to believe the worst of us. And I think as South Africans, Stephen has mentioned this more elegantly than I do, I think we tend to be a bit distrustful of our governments, which is a healthy thing. I think everybody should distrust governments all the world over. Not because I'm an anti-establishment. It's just that, one of the best things I ever heard about politicians is that they're like bananas. They hang together in a bunch. They're all yellow, and you won't find a straight one in the bunch. And I tend to subscribe to that. So you add all those things together, and particularly if you take the vested interest angle, if we look at the time that it occurred, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas were basically the two big dogs in the kennel of world aviation airliner production, with Airbus industry of Europe coming along at the heels. They brought out the A300 and they had plans for bigger and better things. And if you add in the adversarial nature of the American legal system, where you can sue somebody if you stub your toe while you're having a bride at his house, corporate America, it very much latched onto that, the liability aspect. Objects in the rearview mirror appear closer than they are and that kind of thing. We started wrapping everybody in cotton wool. And I think the fear from the manufacturer was if there was any hint of any liability on their point, that preferred to have it point somewhere else. And you had a scenario where we were coming to the end of a previous regime, new people coming along, and there was a sort of an aura which allowed people to plant stories. They could go unchallenged. And unfortunately, they did. And I think a lot of the stories that were put out there were not based on any kind of concernable fact that I could find. And I think that was Stephen's experience as well, but he can speak for himself to that. And a lot of it was based on the whole thing of little knowledge can be very dangerous. People who thought they knew a lot about aviation, I'm not claiming I'm a worldwide expert on it. I come from it from my background of having been in possibly one of the most well-regarded air forces in the world, where they drummed in aviation safety into us, and we'd all walk from one end of the runway to the other to pick up junk and stuff like that in various places at various times. Where flight safety is non-negotiable. It's something that you just don't argue about, and it doesn't matter what happens. We're not going to try and throw you in jail because you made a boo-boo. Tell us what the boo-boo was. Let's find out how to prevent it happening so that we don't have the same thing again. And in this whole miasma, what I was talking about is you had information coming out which was not checked. It was published by various newspapers, and the press council have had hearings on this as well. And we also had people involved in their journalism sector who also had personal access to Grant, which I go to at length in one of the chapters of my book. And that's unfortunate that I think we're, having been at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, at the deepest depth that wreckage has ever been salvaged from, not recovering the entire aircraft, possibly, first of all, because it's impossible to recover everything because door 4 forwards were shattered to pieces. They recovered a large amount from door 4 backwards. And also not being able to pinpoint a simple cause. Because what I found with my book when I made it available to all the relatives, all the accidents, Many of them came to me and said, "Thank you. We just wanted a simple answer. We, listening to the newspaper, reading the newspapers, listening to courts of inquiry, or trying to read the court of inquiry report didn't make any sense to us. But this, in simple words, makes it easier for us to understand." And I think because there was that lack of one simple thing where people could latch onto, everything became believable, especially in that context.
Yeah, certainly. I think Rennie van Zyl in the first ep of the show put it quite succinctly, where he said, unfortunately, where you do not have a clear answer that is indisputable, this is where conspiracy grows. Yep. This is where theories grow.
Exactly.
For better or for worse, I suppose. But in this case, I would argue for worse. Stephen, I mean, for you, you really took on the task of analyzing every vector of this puzzle, and I think your position on how you feel about the various theories about the crash is quite clear from the show. But I mean, were there any points and are there any points now where you do to this day feel like, okay, this does cast a little bit of doubt in terms of maybe there was some foul play, if not into the accident itself, but just going on around that allowed some of this sort of grey area to persist, or do you feel it's pretty clear on the balance of everything you analysed?
Yeah, look. As we found out in the program, Arms Corps were bringing in stuff on the aircraft, and they had been telling people for years that there was stuff on the aircraft, and that the pilots had been making copies of this, that, and the other, and sending it all over the world to members of their families. Yet none of that stuff ever came up. No one ever produced a document to say, this is on my aeroplane. And you're certainly not going to find any of that stuff in any consignment that goes on an aeroplane. Besides all that, I don't think there was anything on that aircraft that contributed to any fire, to the cause of the downfall of the Helderberg. It had nothing to do with it. So whether there was anything on the Helderberg or not is basically, as far as I'm concerned, irrelevant, because it didn't. It wasn't the cause of the accident.
I've often thought, based on the fact that Mark and you and I have had discussions about this. I mean, I suppose the one thing is, sure, if there was some kind of sanctions busting effort going on using flights of any nature, whether they're cargo or civilian or whatever it is, it's very unlikely that the parastatals would have informed the pilots of the plane, listen, we're just illicitly bringing this on. I imagine the plausible deniability would need to go right through the chain. So I personally do feel it's very plausible, looking at the balance of evidence and things that Rennie sort of spoke to in terms of his conversations with Arms Corps. I do believe that kind of thing could have been happening, but as you guys say, it is largely irrelevant when looking at the way you guys have analysed and perceived the events of the crash.
And if I may say, I mean, any pilot that allegedly was aware of this, I'm pretty certain would not fly that aircraft if he thought it endangered himself, because pilots are not inherently suicidal, and his passengers and crew. I just don't see that happening. And to accuse him of doing that, or to have suffered the consequences of doing that, and then to carry on flying an aircraft for 9 hours allegedly on the 30 minutes of oxygen you have in the cockpit when there's noxious gases in the aircraft. Personally, I have a big issue with that. I don't care who makes that kind of allegation. To make it against someone who's not around to defend themselves as well, and then to continue repeating it, I have an issue with that, and it's well known. I sort of put that in my book when I go through the TRC hearings and what happened there. And it just doesn't make any kind of logical sense from a human point of view as well for the pilots to have done that. Yes, there were naughty things happening, but would you endanger the sole lifeline you had? And then let's not forget, that crashed in the deepest part of the Indian Ocean. And when Rennie van Zyl went and asked for help from the international agencies, the initial answer to them was, forget it, you can't do it, it's too deep. I mean, what a gift. If you had been naughty, say, oh, well, guys, we struck a luck here. It can't be found. They're never going to find our fingerprints on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's exactly what I said in the book. But I'd say I knew, well, I still do, I know several pilots that were captains in South African Airways who actually flew with Davy Ace. And I was on my way back to work the one day because I used to work outside the country. And the pilot for my flight that day just happened to be a friend of ours. And he came out of the cockpit and we were having a chat, and he was discussing the book with me. And he was politely astonished that the stories were going around about how reckless and ignorant Davy Ace had been accused of being. They ignored international law, flew an airplane for 9.5 hours with an aircraft full of dead people because he refused, or he was told not to land an aircraft with an active fire in the back of it.
Yeah,
That's movie stuff. That's James Bond stuff.
Yeah, and I'd also, if I may, Stephen, I'd also, one of the things I'd like to know is 3 people were mentioned by name, that they were apparently the people who gave the order, or either this one or that one or that one. I'd like to know how you get from a lowly radio operator as you are, have the phone number for Pick Buerta or for PW Buerta or Magnus Milan so that you can phone them first. And in any case, a lowly radio operator is not going to give over an open frequency, which can be heard by any other airline in the world who happen to be on that frequency. You're not going to give them that kind of an order, because immediately those pilots would go to the International Pilots Association and have that guy's license stripped away and the airline embargoed. It just doesn't make any kind of logical sense.
We did hear from Captain Carl Jensen, very much point blank, also highly respected captain. Those kind of orders would not be accepted in the first place.
He would have been politely told where to go.
Yes, quite right.
Yeah. I mean, Ray Downs also confirms that very same point in his book. Unfortunately, I've got a copy of it somewhere, but unfortunately I can't remember the name. He even said in his book that if Davy Ace had requested permission to land his aircraft and he'd been denied, he even mentions in his book even a guy with a normal ham radio would have been able to pick up that transmission.
I've got recordings from ham radios on that frequency listening to SA aircraft.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's utterly ridiculous.
So, I mean, we know that there are, kind of, I suppose, 2 major schools of thought in terms of, what happened on that night. And there is a lot of emotion.
Yes, sadly.
Certainly, possibly an amount of anger, an amount of exasperation. Helderberg is a charged subject, of course. And one thing that I respect very much of guys like both of you and also of guys like Dr. David Klatzer is that willingness to speak up for what you believe in. And, one of the goals that I had in producing this series was to try and get all of these different strands of information at least in the same place, right? We don't necessarily have to agree with each other. We shouldn't. We shouldn't all agree. But what I wanted to ask, from your guys' side, as people that have been outspoken on a very charged topic, has it ever been difficult for you to continue saying something that is maybe unpopular or not well received? And is there perhaps, even though you disagree with other theories like Dr. David Klatzer's, is there at least on some level a little bit of respect that, at least there is some kind of similarity in a quest for truth, whether you believe it's the same truth or not?
I can certainly say I respect Stephen and Roy Downs and various other people who came at it from a point of information. I must say that I have a small issue with Boeing's consultant, and Dr. David Klatzer was hired by Boeing right at the start. He certainly knew what was going on during the court of inquiry, because I have it on very good authority. I can't disclose because of an NDA at the moment, but it'll come to light soon, where he offered no charge to deal with any technical questions that members of the airline, a certain association the airline had, if they came and met him at his private residence. So he was aware of what was going on during the Margot inquiry. And also to then refuse to entertain other things. I'm willing to take any evidence that says no, but I haven't seen it from that quarter. I've seen supposition. I've said he said this to somebody who told him that another guy told him. And as someone who's well versed in court cases, I would expect that Dr. Glatzo would at least understand that that is not irrefutable evidence. It can't be accepted as such. If he has any irrefutable evidence, I'd love him to do what I've done. Take it to the Department of Civil Aviation, nowadays the Civil Aviation Authority, honouring the invitation that the then Minister of Transport after the TRC said, if you have any new factual evidence that warrants a new investigation, bring it to us and we'll have a look at it, which is what I did. And I would hope that we could find the wreckage somewhere or some pieces left that we can subject to modern forensic things, because Dr. Glatzo is a forensic scientist. So then let's have a look at that. And in the terms of what we know now, we've learned a lot in 37 years. And if we could find that would be wonderful. But from the information I had, it's not likely to happen.
So, I mean, on that note, towards the end of episode 3, myself personally, I was lucky enough to actually be permitted access to SAA Technical. And we did actually find parts of the wreckage that were still there. So some of them inside one of the hangars indoors, and large parts of, I wouldn't say large parts, but many parts of the wreckage that had been stored outside in the courtyard and largely forgotten about until we went looking for them. This was from information from Mark Daniel, son of Alan Daniel, Carl Jensen, various others through the Facebook channels as well. And, we went there and we laid hands on them. We took photographs of them. Very moving moment to actually be able to see that. And the intention had been to go back and film those parts of the wreckage and actually document them and hopefully assist or facilitate the removal of that wreckage to a proper place such as the
I think the SAA Museum would be the best place.
Quite right. Unfortunately, by the time we'd finished our recce and we submitted a formal request to SAA, they unfortunately came back with a very large bill to go through and film it. So we weren't able to afford that. I mean, it's an net production. We did our best on it, but everyone's got limits. And unfortunately, there were two minds of that for me. The one mind was, why would they not want to be doing everything they could to close the chapter? But on another side, it did remind me of what you had said, Mark, where if there was wreckage, I mean, we were told large parts of it were buried or concreted in under one of the runways. That
was my answer from the Civil Aviation Department was.
I mean, learning this, Stephen and Mark, maybe Stephen to you first. I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, is knowing that the wreckage is still there at SAA Technical, I mean, is this worth another, even if it's an academic effort, to take it forward? Do you think that would be something worth doing?
Absolutely.
Without question.
Absolutely, without question. I mean, to get another look at that, and like we say, almost what do we know? Nearly 40 years later. I mean, technology must have improved tremendously over the last 40 years. I mean, not as far as I'm concerned. I can't operate a computer properly, but imagine what they could find now.
Yeah. If we
they couldn't find 40 years ago.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, provided it hasn't been outside and exposed to the elements, but if anything has been covered, that would be first prize. And let's get the answers. I mean, as I said,
so they're not going to find ammonium perchlorate.
Well, you can just send a fax to Sonchem. They make it locally, so it's not a problem. Well, they may still make it locally, but they certainly did at that time.
We're running out of time, but there's just one more topic that I really want to get into, Mark, with you. The subject of Kapton and wet arc tracking that forms the basis of what I would say is the dominant modern theory of what happened on board Helderberg. You mentioned moisture in the cabin, or moisture as a cause for the arcing that would form as a result of hairline cracks in Kapton wiring. Could you expand on that a little bit more? Because one of the questions a lot of my friends have said to me, okay, but where's the moisture inside a plane?
It comes from you. If you're in a plane for several hours, the human body, when you exhale, there's a component of moisture to that. And your aircraft fuselage outside is at minus 40 or minus 38 degrees, depending on the ambient outside, but it's way below zero. And what happens is this vapor from your lungs goes throughout the cabin, and with the transfer of the cold temperature from outside, it condenses on the fuselage, on the inside of the fuselage, on the insulation blankets, on the ribbing, along the wiring looms and things like that. And if we bear in mind that the Helderberg had been flying for several hours, with 159 people breathing in and out in it, also having tea and coffee, the galley was near that partition. You have steam coming out of there. And the temperature differential would cause this to condense, and it could run down and do things. And if I've been a passenger on aircraft going into London when we descend, coming into Heathrow, where you have little droplets of water falling out of the panels above you. That's where that moisture comes from. It's ever present. It's part of it. And it doesn't mean to say that Kapton, by design, was intended to do that. It was a wonder material when it was discovered, and they couldn't test it for 7, 8, 9 years. And the Swiss airplane was 7 years old, 1 year younger than the Helderberg. And that had a problem. That was conclusively proven that was where the problem is. Other planes have had the same thing, and also towards the end of long flights, where a lot of these things have occurred.
I mean, yeah, so that would then gel with why the accident happened, where it happened within the flight profile.
Correct, and it also fits, if I might say, the conversations with all the flight information regions. I know that Stephen in his book goes into those in great detail. But it also fits with the fact that there's no missing middle tape of ZUR, and there never was. They use 24-hour reels. So, you know, when one ends, the next 24-hour section comes in. And I've heard it from various people that all those tapes were collected, unfortunately not immediately, because it wasn't a legal requirement of the airline. Only a few airlines around the world had that. But when they were collected, the number of tapes collected was the number of tapes that were listened to, and that was the number of tapes that were available. Okay, they had another batch that they were using during that time, but they were purchased new. And the other thing is that pallet, when the plane was delayed for several hours at Type A due to the weather, was subjected to a random inspection, and they had to haul out PL. And then they looked at PR, and everything that they looked at tallied. So surely if there was something wrong there, which was unstable, A, it would have come to light, and B, it probably would have been set off. Those are just interesting things, which I do mention in my book. But that's where the moisture comes from. Yeah.
One thing about that tape, obviously, like you've just said, Mark, that there is no middle tape because they're 24-hour tapes.
Yeah.
But they're looking for a missing tape with a conversation on it. That conversation that they're looking for, supposedly of Davy Ace asking for permission to land within the first 2-3 hours of the flight. They're actually looking for the wrong tape. They said, Roy Downs said that the second day's tape was missing. Well, that conversation, if anyone's looking for it, would have been on the first tape.
Correct.
So they were looking for the wrong tape in the first place.
Because the 3 hours out of Type A was on that ZUR tape for that day.
Yeah.
That's right.
They actually made contact, and it was an ops normal call. So if they'd have done anything, the alleged call to the high-powered people who were raised from their bed in the middle of the night would have been on that tape.
And that's the one that you took us through in episode 3, Stephen. As we kind of run out of time here, and as we're about to sign off, I think the one thing that I really just want to end off on here is this idea that this Kapton wiring, look, as a failure is, it is what it is. Materials do fail, accidents do happen.
Correct.
Where it does get difficult, however, is this idea that Boeing may have known about this and made as you say in the show, a cold, calculated decision of profits versus cost. Well,
the survivability of the company or not.
Yeah.
I can fully understand that. And also in the knowledge at the time, it hadn't affected any other airliner to a great degree. All those decisions are entirely justifiable. Nobody makes a decision to build a plane to crash. It's built to travel safely. And we learn, or we should learn, from the mistakes. And we should learn in a non-adversarial manner. We shouldn't be looking to have my theory or your theory accepted. It should be a bunch of like-minded people coming around a table saying, hell, guys, what happened? How can we stop this happening again? And let's not blame one another. It should be a just culture where you can freely come out and say what you do. And if someone disagrees with you, be respectful. We're all grown-ups. And motivate. Don't raise your voice. Improve the quality of your argument.
Guys, we are out of time. Unfortunately, I know we could talk about this for days with the many facts, theories, leads, evidence, transcriptions, etc. But I do hope that as a result of this series, or the series, and some of the submissions by contributors, that hopefully this adds something constructive to the Helderberg discussion moving forward online and in media as well.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
That would be my prayer. And also, I think just before we close, I mean, to all the relatives and all the victims of all SAA accidents, certainly that I've covered in my book, but particularly of this one, our sincere condolences. It's not easy.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Stephen. And
Yes.
thanks, Mark. That's it from us here in studio on the Helderberg Companion Podcast. On a personal note, I'd also like to thank every person that's helped us in the production of this project. That's from the family members that we spoke to the folks that actively worked on Operation Resolve and subsequent work after that firsthand, and also to the independent investigators into Helderberg, guys like you guys, also to David Klatzo, to Sam van Volt, all of these people that helped us put this together. I know that there's great emotion that comes with this topic, but whatever conclusion one draws from the body of knowledge on 295, I do hope that this project will inspire you to think further and hopefully enable constructive conversations in the future. Thanks so much from all of us.